What's up, folks? This is Tony Brewer. You're listening to or watching, as the case may be, Cogitations. Cogitations is the podcast where we think about things, we contemplate them, we turn them over in our minds, and then we discuss them. Daniel chapter 7, verse 28, Daniel writes, "Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me. My countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart." Well, we're not going to keep the matter in our heart. We're going to talk about it. And of course, this is Free for All Friday. This is where we go right to the comment section. What I've been doing lately is I have some notes and information that is the meat of the podcast, and then the comment section we go to after that's done. And it's been working out pretty well. John Exum, good morning to you. Good morning to Tony and everyone here. We've got folks rolling in, so we're glad to see that. If you're watching us on where we at, John? If you're watching us on YouTube, please consider interacting with YouTube on our behalf. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And consider going to Substack and getting a free subscription there. John Exum asked, "What did you think about the Vice President Trump and Putin of Ukraine, the Biden speech?" It's really sad. And the problem is, whenever we try to call that stuff out, there's always going to be people, oops, I hit a button again. All right. There's always going to be people who kind of pearl clutch, and they'll go to scriptures that say, you got to respect the people in authority and stuff like that. But look, if you're being vitriolic, you need to stop. If you're making fun of this old man, Joe Biden, and you're getting some kind of perverse pleasure out of it, you need to stop. But that being said, it is so very important to get this information out, because so many people, they don't pay attention to the news. I watch the news. I pay very close attention to the politics and stuff. I watch several political pundits, both on the left and the right. One of my favorite programs to watch is Timcast IRL, which Timcast he's a centrist. I mean, he really and truly, he'd be a classic liberal. I know you're not making fun, John. I know you're not. This is just, it's something that I saw come across my timeline and earlier today, and this person was, it was a good post. It was general, but it was kind of a chastisement of people, quite frankly, ribbing our president of the United States on Facebook a little bit. And look, I gaffe all the time. I'm teaching through the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 20, and then going into Acts chapter 21. I really made a point about Paul talking to the elders in Miletus, the elders of Ephesus in Miletus, before he departs to go to Rome. And I said this 2 or 3 times. And somebody raised their hand and said, "Don't you mean Jerusalem?" Of course I meant Jerusalem. I was focused on the end of the journey. So Paul left Ephesus, or left Miletus, and he was bound for Jerusalem, but his final destination was Rome. And so I just had it messed up in my head. A lot of times I'll talk about David in the lion's den instead of Daniel. Everybody knows I mean Daniel, and it's just, you get tongue-tied, so everybody gaffes. But the problem is, when you look at the preponderance of evidence from the last several years of Joe Biden, he clearly is a man demented. He is not in possession of his full physical or his full mental capabilities, his full mental faculties. Also, the mainstream news media knew this. In 2020, when he ran, there were mainstream news platforms that were saying, "Joe, we just need you to run and win, because we need you even if you're a dead body in the White House, or don't die because we just need you as a body in the White House." So the mainstream news media knew this. So I think people's reaction now that this is coming to full light, it's almost a sense of vindication and justice. So they're saying, look, the man said Vice President Trump and President Putin. You cannot hide this. He's a doddering old man, and this is elder abuse. So there's two options. If you're going to disseminate this information, you can say it right out of the front of your mouth and, quite frankly, come off as a little uncaring, or you can kind of poke a little fun at it, which it deserves to be poked fun at. It deserves to be ridiculed because it is ridiculous. And all of this gaslighting by the liberal left and the mainstream news media, yeah, I see where even people of the Christian faith, man, they're like, about time. It's about time. So again, if you're being vitriolic, if you're getting some kind of perverse pleasure out of this, you need to stop what you're doing. But man, I mean, for the folks that don't pay attention on a regular basis, Facebook is the town square. That's where these things have to be talked about. And to leverage Christian morality and say we can't even point out the mental incapacity of one of our elected leaders because we don't want to appear as if we're making fun of him or disrespecting him, then I think that's a pretty dire situation. Anyway, that's a long roundabout way of saying I don't know what I thought about the speech. I think it was pretty rough. If you were going to establish a seminary in Canada, what curriculum would you include and what kind of classes would you add to already established seminaries? Well, first off, there is no good seminary in Canada. There is this in Ontario. There's this Great Lakes Bible College or whatever, and it's a institution of higher learning, and it's also paired with a high school or like a regular school. It is not sound. Open fellowship with denominations, teaching false doctrine about marriage, divorce, and remarriage, teaching false doctrine about the Holy Spirit. I would not add to anything that's already here. I would make something totally new. But the problem is there's so many. I mean, like Canada and the United States has got such a good working relationship with each other. If somebody here wanted to go to a seminary, I would send them down south somewhere or out west. You know, Bear Valley, Memphis School of Preaching. Where's Terrence Brownlow Dindy? Somewhere in Texas, I can't remember. Wesley Simons, I cannot remember where he is, but that's in either North or South Carolina. I just send them there, you know. And in fact, truly and really, if somebody come to me and said, Tony, I really want to do what you do. I want to be a gospel preacher. I would say, well, good. You need to come to worship service. You need to come to Bible class, and we can even meet a couple of evenings a week and just study under me. I'm not a fan of the seminary model. I'm not saying that I'm ungrateful for the education that I received. I'm not saying that I'm ungrateful for, well, the probably the two, as far as my adulthood is concerned, the two most formative years of my life. But I think this seminary model, and I'm going off my lived experience, so your experience may be different than mine. I think it's changed into something that the people of yesteryear never intended it to be. I think it's more a seminary to educate and train pastors and not evangelists and Bible teachers. I will tell you this, and I've been pretty vocal about this. I learned more about how to be a pastor than I learned how to be like a Timothy or Titus role, like an evangelist. And I'm just saying it's probably best. instead of gutting the best of these congregations. So think about what happens. You got a congregation of 50 members, and you've got you got a subset of those 50 members. You've got 5 or 6 young people. Of those 5 or 6, 3 of them are young men. One of those young men differentiates himself at an early age, say the age of 15, and he starts spending all the time he can at sitting at the feet of the Bible teacher. He's doubling down on his lessons. He's doing extra biblical research in order to learn the nuances and the context, and maybe he's even trying to learn some of the original language so he can do word studies. What do we tell that guy? Oh, you need to be a preacher. What we tell him is, you're not normal. You're different than us. So we are going to ostracize you and separate you and send you away. And so what happens? You lose the person that could be next in line to be a good elder. I don't know that this is a good thing. And I'm not sure what the solution would be. Maybe if we use what we have now, where you still have these seminaries in place, the Church of Christ seminaries, and boy, that sounds denominational, doesn't it? But it is. They're Church of Christ seminaries is what they are. Send them off to seminary with the understanding that they have to come back. We do that. I know the Memphis School of Preaching does that, where like if you're from another country and you come to the Memphis School of Preaching, you have to sign a document where you vow to go back to the land of your nativity. It doesn't always happen, but yeah, I know a couple of people that signed that they didn't go back to the land of their nativity. So anyway, what in the world? This coffee cup, I don't know if I filled it too full or there's a seal on it that's messed up. Okay, maybe it was just me. All right. Let me go back to the comments. Terry Crooks, I hope I said hello to you. If I didn't, I sure meant to. John says he's teaching through the book of Acts. How do you say acts? As I've been learning voiceover and elocution and how in pronunciation and stuff, acts. I'm going to have to figure. It comes off as AX, acts. Anyway, that's free for nothing. Won't cost you a dime more than you're paying now. Yes, Texas Church, the Texas School of Preaching in College Station. That's where Terrence Brownlow Dindy is. And the idea would be the congregation has training for its own preachers or elders, etc. Yes, and I don't know why we're okay with falling short of that ideal. Maybe a good model is what's going on in Georgia with the Georgia School of Preaching, where they have different congregations holding different seminars on classes, and you can take them for credit or you can audit them. I know the Memphis School of Preaching ongoing spiritual training, the MOST program, is really good because you get these collegiate level courses, but you can audit them or you can choose to take them just for a certificate. Or if you meet other criteria, you can actually take them for credit, and it's free. I think the education should always be free to the person needing the education. But yeah, so that's my big spiel. I do not think we ought to burn down the system we have in place with no idea of what would replace it. I mean, congregations have to have preachers, and those preachers need training. I just think, there's maybe some of you folks in the comment section help me out with this. It's in 1 Peter. It may be 1 Peter 4, but judgment must begin at the house of God. Let me just do this. Judgment must begin at the house of God. 1 Peter 4:17. For the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God, and if it first began at us, what shall the end of them be that obey not the gospel of God? So I think underscored in that verse is the idea that we need to be introspective. Let's make sure that we're doing this right. And whether you're the Tri-Cities, whether you're the Texas, whether you're the Bear Valley, whether you're the MSOP, whether you're the Seebs, whether you're anybody else, just what kind of product are we producing? Are we producing, are we putting into a system where we're elevating things, or are we putting into a system where we're causing problems? And I have seen some pretty bad problems. So anyway, just something to think about. Did not Titus have the task of ordaining elders? It doesn't say to establish a school to do this. Not against schools of preaching, by the way. No, I'm with you. That's a fair point. And a lot of people, the only thing worse. Well, excuse me. One of the worst things you can do to somebody is give them responsibility and not also give them the authority to carry out that responsibility. Now think about the preacher model that we have. The preacher model has the responsibility from congregations of a pastor, an elder. He needs to go visit. He needs to make sure everybody's content. He needs to be the face of the congregation. He needs to lead the congregation. He needs to make sure certain things are handled. And he's responsible for all this. But yet, he has no real authority to be able to carry out that responsibility. So the first time in his duties that he has been assigned, when he doesn't carry out those duties, it's not that he fails in the duties. It's that he doesn't carry out those duties the way that a certain subset of the congregation wants him to carry it out. And so they fire him. That's the system we have in place. Well, that's wrong. And whose fault is it? Is it the preachers? Is it the preaching schools? Is it the seminaries? Or is it the congregation? My answer is yes. The entire system is bugged. If you're going to have a gospel preacher and you're going to give him all the duties of an elder, he needs to be an elder, and he needs not to be able to be fired for carrying out those responsibilities. John Exum says, I teach for the Hyderabad School of Preaching in India. It's not like ours in America. It's basic stuff that is taught. Well, yeah, I mean, I was a part of that. Not that, but I was helping a group of Indians. And yeah, we were talking about, like they were confused about Jesus being the Son of God. Very interesting. And Danny Mentor says, titles without authority helps no one. It's like having handcuffs without a key. You got that right. And then Aaron Dotson says, the thing that bothers me is when a school or a congregation does not help local congregations to become self-sustaining, but instead fosters dependency on the school or other congregations to provide preachers. A quick glance at the T epistles, that's Timothy and Titus, 1st, 2nd Timothy and Titus, shows that it was the evangelist's work to help a congregation to develop and be self-dependent. Absolutely. That's like the work here at Riverview. Right now, we're getting support so that the brewers can be here. But this is it. This is the end of it. 2024, we're done. No more support, because this congregation in 3 short years, when you've got somebody in that's not trying to fleece the flock, when you got somebody in that's not trying to make a living off the flock, and you've got somebody in that's trying to help the flock instead of fleece it, in 3 short years, we don't need any money from the outside. We're self-supporting. And that's the way it should be. I don't think that there should be an umbilical cord of money flowing from a bunch of churches to another church just to keep it alive for the course of years. Maybe you need to let that church die. Why would you spend 10 or 15 years worth of resources to keep the lights on in a building where 15 or 20 old people are gathering that don't get out and do anything? Just shut that congregation down, sell the building, and give the money to another congregation that's actually doing well. Have we not read the parable of the talents? The 1-talent man buried his. God took it away from him and gave it to the one that performed the most. Oh boy, that's brutal, is it not? It's Bible though. Here's an idea. If I were going to send a student to a preaching school as a congregation, why not have him agree to come back and work with his home congregation and not just go off someplace else? Just a thought. Absolutely. And incidentally, that would mean then that that preaching student, he is not responsible for raising support to go. Now keep in mind, if you send a family, and that's another thing, man, there were people at the Memphis School of Preaching whenever I was there that was getting like $6,000 a month of support. There were single students that were getting like $3,000 a month of support. I can't even talk about that. But if the congregation sends a preaching student to a seminary with the idea that he's to come back, then that congregation should be the one to finance everything. And if the congregation wants to go out and raise support, then the congregation can do it. But that alleviates the personal responsibility of raising the support from the individual. You see, whenever you send a kid off to preaching school from your congregation, you cut him from the congregation. He's left. He has no more ties. Stefan Millet was taught mostly by our gospel preachers online. Stefan Millet went to the Southeast Institute of Biblical Studies. The entire idea that there are non-institutional congregations is mind-blowing. Yeah, I get that. And where do we get the terms institutional and non-institutional from? Why not the term biblical? Well, so I've got to mitigate here. If you have a subset of Christians who hold a particular set of scruples, and those scruples are more or less consistent throughout several different kinds of congregations, and they all have the same bend, then I can see where those labels would crop up. As long as they are not being used pejoratively, I think those labels are fine. But if they're being used pejoratively, then they are not good. Then there's a division. Most of the time, and again, this is my lived experience. You may have a different experience. Most of the time when I have talked to people from non-institutional congregations, as long as you don't push on their particular scruple, they are fine with you. Most of them are not even going to bring up the differences. They would rather not. The problem is where we get, whenever a non-institutional and an institutional congregation, whenever they have an interaction, one party or both wants to bring up the differences and talk about the differences. So think about this. Some people have a scruple that it is an absolute sin to go into a restaurant that serves alcohol and eat. I am not among them. I believe that is a matter of judgment. But if you tried to convince that person to go in there, and if you tried to make an issue out of it, you are forcing that person into a corner to where they have to take a stand based on their conscience. And the only stand is, I'm right with God and you're not. if you push them far enough. Now, it looks like on the outside that they are making the division. They are not. It's you who would be making the division. We who have more freedom in Christ, who are a little bit less scrupulous in those manners, according to Romans chapter 14, it is our responsibility not to bring up those differences. So it's a long way around the bush of like, well, you know, where do we get the term institutional and non-institutional? It came about because we needed labels to show small differentiations in matters of judgment. But anyway, I've lost where I am. Oh, there we go. Aaron Dotson. If we follow the concept of the T epistles, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, we develop homegrown evangelists, elders, and deacons. We don't have to bring in someone from somewhere else. In my experience, and from my viewpoint, following the T epistle concepts would probably minimize preachers moving around so much and preachers not feeling quote unquote at home, generally speaking. I 100% co-sign onto that comment. I was talking to a young man in his late 20s that claims that there's no authority to use the funds from their treasury for certain things. I read where there's no limitation because it is up to the elders to distribute those funds. Absolutely. And incidentally, when you're talking to that young man and that subject comes up, if he says, look, if your congregation takes money out of the funds to help, to help with an orphan's home or to help Christians or to help people who are not Christians, say, listen, I agree that we need to be very careful with the money that is taken out of the treasury in order to do certain things. And I'm so glad that I have an eldership that shows wisdom and follows the Bible. And I'm in your camp. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. But if it goes farther than that initial contact and one or both sides starts making an issue, and Danny Mentor, I'm not saying that you did this. I'm just using your comment. So I'm leaving your comment and going over here to for instance. If one or both parties takes it farther than that initial contact where, you know, the person who is non-institutional says, look, this is a sin, we shouldn't do it. And the person who is institutional says, well, you know, that's absolutely a scriptural view. And I wholeheartedly support the decision that your church leadership has made. That's easy. That's all you got to do. I strongly disagree with institutional and non-institutional, liberal and conservatives as names. In my opinion, it's saying the one we aren't a part of is wrong and not going to heaven. So there is a sense in which I agree with you, but we have to have nomenclature for language, or else we are inadequate to be able to discuss these things. Like if I say to you, well, there's a congregation, there's two, if I say to you in Anywhereville, USA, there are two congregations, and one congregation is an institutional congregation and one congregation holds non-institutional views. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It communicates the culture and viewpoints of the two different congregations. Now, I am way more in alignment with you on conservative and liberal. Conservative and liberal should be scriptural and non-scriptural. If a congregation is scriptural, it is by its nature conservative, because conservative means of, like, or having attributes that are associated and identified with conserving. So a congregation is to conserve the commandments, precepts, and divine examples of this book right here. And if they don't, then they're liberal, and that means they're unscriptural. So I think instead of conservative and liberal, just do scriptural and unscriptural on that. But I don't think institutional and non-institutional falls into that category unless it's the intent of the speaker to be pejorative. So that's just my 2 cents. Tony, can you give us a funny preacher story that you have dealt with? Man, I don't know. Talk about funny. I always go to this one. This one kind of made me laugh, but in a good way. Studying the Bible with somebody, a young man, and he had divorced his wife, and I come in late to the game, so I thought this has already been established. He was resolved to be a eunuch for the kingdom for the rest of his life. And finally, I asked him, I said, "What? Tell me the scenario and happenings around your divorce." And he said, "Well, we divorced for irreconcilable differences. That's why I have to be a eunuch." I said, "Well, tell me a little bit about, what led you to the courthouse to sign your name on the dotted line that says we're dissolving this marriage for irreconcilable differences." He said, "Well, I worked second shift, and on Fridays I would leave at whatever time, and then my wife would call my buddy, and he would go over, and they would have physical relations all evening." I said, "Yeah, those differences would be very hard to reconcile." He put his wife away for fornication, folks. Just because you sign to get a judge anywhere in the United States to make the reason for the divorce fornication, you're going to be hard pressed to do that. He signed for irreconcilable differences, but he put her away for fornication. Anyway, I think the last I heard of him, he had met a young woman, and now they're married, and he's faithful and all that good stuff. So that's good. I'm trying to think of other stuff. Yeah, that's about the only thing that comes to mind. I've got some very, very interesting stories that for sake of privacy of the individuals involved, I can't repeat. But I will tell you this. I saved a man's life while he was in the hospital. He had resolved himself to lay there and die. He was refusing medical treatment. And that's probably if I were to have a wall of achievements, that would be foremost among them. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. But that was a good one. And Danny Mentor says, it takes me back to 1 Corinthians 1:10. Yeah, there's division among you. But the institutional, non-institutional division is very different than the 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10 division. If the congregation you attend does or doesn't do something, that's fine. Don't try to force it. Attend the one that you feel comfortable with. I don't care if a congregation has a kitchen or not. Absolutely. Yes, and most of the time, even people who associate one side or the other that aisle, institution or non-institution, most of the time that's their attitude. It's only whenever the two sides come together and one or both sides one side tries to convince the other that they can do what they're forbidding, and the other side tries to convince the other that they need to forbid what is their freedom to do. And that's a tug of war that one side has got to drop the rope. And according to Romans 14, the side that drops the rope is the side with the freedom, not the side with the scruple. In fact, I've mentioned that more than once, so I'm just going to go read it for us. All right. Hast thou faith? Have it to thyself before God. Happy is he that condemneth not himself in that thing which he alloweth. So that verse underscores the fact that whenever I am as a person who thinks that it is okay to give money from the treasury to a non-Christian, that it's okay to send money to an orphan home, it's okay to have a kitchen in the building, all that good stuff. it's up to me to keep my mouth shut about that whenever I'm talking to these other people. In other words, I don't rub their nose in my liberty. That's Romans 14, 22. Now, Romans 14:23, and he that doubteth is damned if he eat, because he that eateth is not of faith, for whatsoever is not of faith is sin. The person that has the scruple, it's his responsibility not to do that which violates his conscience. This is one of the hardest verses in the Bible to live up to and to follow, because those of us who have freedoms, we are to not rub the noses of the people who have the scruples in our freedoms, and it's up to the only responsibility the people who have the scruple is to make sure that they don't violate their conscience. Now, neither side can make an issue of fellowship out of it. If either side makes an issue of fellowship out of it, then check this. I beseech you, brethren. See, a lot of times we apply this verse to false teachers. It's not false teachers. It's people who make trouble over scruples and freedoms. Now I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause division and offenses contrary to the doctrine which ye have learned, and avoid them. That's Romans 16:17. So anyway, I can't remember what the question was that caused me to go down there. Oh yeah, this it wasn't a question, it was a comment which I very much believe. If the congregation you attend does or doesn't do something, that's fine. Just don't force it on somebody else. Attend where you feel comfortable. And in this one area, that's why I say if you're not being pejorative, if you're not being vitriolic, if you're just simply using nomenclature so we can have an adequately complex language to articulate these ideas, then you can say, oh well, if you have a problem with a church that has a fellowship hall with a kitchen and all that, right down the road there's a congregation that doesn't. And they don't ascribe to many of the things we ascribe to, but we consider them brothers, and you might fit in with those people and you might like them. So there's an institutional and a non-institutional. And it's not it's not perfect. It's not a perfect thing. I mean, you're absolutely right. We probably need to avoid the names, but sometimes, the names come about a lot of times just because it's easier. We need labels. Do feminism belong in the church? Absolutely not. The church is a patriarchal structure. God is the head of Christ. Christ is the head of the man. The man is the head of his woman. And the family unit is head over the children. And everyone submits to the institution of the congregation. That's Ephesians chapter 5. Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 2, he says, I suffer not a woman to teach, nor usurp authority over the man, but she's to be in silence. That word there is not silence, is in zero volume. That word is hesukia, which carries with it the idea she needs to be sat down and quiet and not drawing attention to herself. It's a patriarchal establishment, folks. That's it. And feminism is egalitarianism between men and women. Men and women are not equal. That's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. But equal means you can substitute a man in a woman's place or a woman in a man's place. Men and women are not equal. In fact, not all men are equal. A lot of times folks say, God's no respecter of persons. Yes, he is. He's not a respecter of persons when it comes to salvation, but he's a respecter of persons when it comes to who can be an elder, who can be a deacon, who can lead in the church. If you want to pray publicly, you have to have holy hands and you have to be a man. That's a respecter of persons. That's a differentiation. I am really afraid that with this idea of consumer Christianity, that because Western culture has influenced the church so much, we have become, just like our society, a gynocentric society. And because most of the congregations around the United States, at least that I've seen, most of them are women, the leadership tends to cater to women. So they cater to a more feminine atmosphere. Find me one place in the New Testament where the Lord tells Christians to be like women. It's always, quit ye like men. That's about all I'm going to say about that. It's just crazy that they won't have a kitchen, yet they'll meet in large groups in each other's homes after services. I love that we are all able to meet under one roof, not that it's bound by Scripture. Absolutely. And I will tell you this, it's not the kitchen that they have an issue with, because they will co-opt a building, and that building has all the modern amenities already that comes with it. It's spending money on a kitchen. All of this goes down to how the Lord's money is to be spent. And they have a very narrow view of how the Lord's money is to be spent. Quite frankly, what I have noticed is from the people who are non-institutional, they are actually individually much more giving, liberal in their giving, than people who are quote unquote institutional. Think about this. In a non-institutional congregation, if somebody in the neighborhood who's not a Christian is in need, they'll all get together individually, separate and apart from what they give to the church, and take up a collection and give to this individual in need. What do my brethren do who are of the institutional persuasion? They'll go to the elders and say, hey, we need to give to this worthy cause. And the elders will appoint a committee, and the committee will decide, well, we've got too much stuff in the budget this year, and we don't need to give to that cause. And all of this bureaucracy is going on while these people over here are starving. This principle is called Corban. Whenever, in Matthew chapter 15, whenever the Pharisees come to Jesus and say, why do your disciples violate the tradition of the fathers? They didn't wash their hands. Jesus said, why do you violate the commandments of God with your tradition? The commandment is to honor your father and mother. But you all say Corban. In other words, the money whereby we would take care of our parents in their old age, we give to the temple. And once they die, because they say, we need help, we're destitute. And well, look, I've given all my money to the Lord. You can't fault me for giving all my money to the Lord, can you? Now, once they die, you'll go back to the temple and talk to the priest. And let's say you gave him $100,000. He'll give you back your $100,000 less a percentage that he keeps for himself. If somebody at a non-institutional, or if somebody comes to a non-institutional congregation who's not a Christian, they're not going to get any money out of the treasury whatsoever, but they will get a lot of help from the members at large. Many times, very often, I'm painting with a broad brush, so if this doesn't apply to where you are, I'm not talking about where you are. But in the institutional congregations, what I've found is if somebody needs help, they'll say, well, I already give my money to the church, you need to go to the elders. And they won't help. So very often, the non-institutional brethren put the institutional brethren to absolute shame in how they function and operate in the world. And I would trade 10 kitchens for that kind of working in the world. Anyway. Can a Christian woman be a feminist? A Christian woman is able to be a feminist, but the answer is no. Feminism does not align with God's will. It's kind of like social justice. Social justice is contrary to God's justice, therefore it is sinful. Awesome. Hey, Alabama says, that's what I meant earlier. You said it better. Appreciate you there. God is a respecter of persons when he listens to and answers prayer. If a person is a sinner, he hears them not. If you're in the church, God hears your plea and prayer. Yeah, there's several instances where God is a respecter of persons. It's specifically in the context of salvation. In other words, it doesn't matter where you are, what language you speak, what nation you're from. Everyone comes to God in the same way, and the invitation is given to all equally. I attend a congregation that has hymn books, but they are never used. Instead, the congregation often sings gospel songs that play on the radio. As a result, half of the congregation sings along, while others, who do not know the songs, just sit there silently. I don't like this, so I sing a different song I know instead. Is this wrong of me? Do you sing a different song that you know while the song leader is singing a song? That would be wrong. That would be in violation of the decently and in order clause of 1 Corinthians chapter 14. I am with you 100%. They need congregational singing has to be congregational. If they're not going to use those books and they're going to sing songs that are not in the books, or they're going to lead songs that's not in the books, they at least need to have a PowerPoint where people can see the music and see the words, you know. But yeah, I wouldn't sing a different song than what the song leader is leading, just because I didn't like the song that was being led. Just like I wouldn't during the sermon that somebody's preaching. If I didn't like the sermon, I wouldn't have a conversation with somebody else during the assembly. But very good question. Oh, Timothy Sundley, he's replying to Danny Minner. He said, I've been with both institutional and non-institutional churches because I don't believe that we need to be divided over these type of things. The Bible doesn't show how the church used the treasury. You're right on. That's a good point. Yeah, I will say with our brethren that hold the view that you can only use treasury money in a very narrow application, I believe that they're going farther than what the Bible says. They're not in sin because they're going farther than what the Bible says. I just contradicted myself because of a gaffe. Here we're talking about Joe Biden messing up, and I just gaffed. Let me clear this up. Our brethren who hold the view that there is only a very, very narrow application for how to spend the treasury money of the church, they are binding tighter than what the Bible allows. The Bible, because the Bible is silent on those matters, gives freedom. That's what I was trying to say. All right. And Deborah O'Neill replying to Terry Crooks, we have hymn books, but we use the overhead to sing. I still use the book, though, because I like to see the whole song. Absolutely. Good stuff. All right. Man, let me tell you, the comments seem to have slowed down a little bit. For the last few minutes, I'm going to share with you something that I've been thinking about lately. And this is tipping. I just recently found out that in Canada, the wait staff makes a full wage. Yeah, straining a gnat and swallowing a camel. Many times that's the truth. Oh, Rusty Kirby, that's a good question. Is the radio song scriptural? I just assumed that it would be if they were leading it. But yeah, that's a good question. So let's talk about tipping culture for a minute. I know in the United States, tipping culture is a big thing. And whenever I would go out to eat, I would tip, like, especially if the service was good, I would tip much more than 20%. I just figured that into the price because I felt like if you couldn't afford, as a Christian, I wanted to be very, very liberal, and I wanted to be seen being liberal, especially if I were going to go out to eat on a Sunday afternoon. That waitress or waiter was going to get maybe a 30 or 40% tip. because I wanted them to have a good taste in their mouth about the Christians that they waited on that day. Most servers in the Bible Belt have a disdain for Sunday crowd, the Sunday crowd of Christians, because they are notoriously terrible tippers and they are notoriously entitled. They leave the place a mess and they're typically disrespectful. So I wanted to do my little part to change that. And I like being liberal in my giving. Now, Timothy Sundley says, my reply was meant to be to your comments, Tony. I pushed the wrong button. You were right on. Hey, man, Facebook is funny. I appreciate you, Timothy. And I feel weird saying Timothy, Brother Sundley. All right. So it got me to thinking, is there a principle about tipping? Because tipping culture around the world is, you go overseas, they don't tip. The wait staff just makes a wage. In Canada, the wait staff makes a full wage. In other words, they start at the federal minimum wage. So going to the International House of Pancakes down the road, the wait staff makes like $17 an hour starting out. Well, I'm not going to tip 20%. I don't even want to tip 15%. In my opinion, if you make a full wage, I shouldn't tip you anything, because you're going to get my drink, you're bringing me napkins, all that. That's just part of your job. Well, that's the extreme. So if I'm going to follow principles of the Bible, and if I believe that all things that pertain to life and godliness are found in God's word, 2 Peter 1:3, then the Bible has to speak on this. And so here's what I come up with. I think about generosity. Luke chapter 6, and we're going to pull these verses out of their context and use them principally, allegorically, as it were. Luke chapter 6, verse 38, give and it shall be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that you mete, it shall be measured to you again. Folks, if you want people to be generous with you, be generous with them. Not a bad principle. 2 Corinthians 9:7 is used when it talks about giving for the general assembly, but this is a proverb. God loveth a cheerful giver. Well, the God loveth a cheerful giver is not bound to the context of giving on the first day of the week. God loves a cheerful giver, period, which is why every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity. So that's any time you have an opportunity to give of your good, give cheerfully, and give as much as you can. That's Luke 6:38. Now, these are principles, okay? I'm not saying that if you go out to eat and your meal is $50, if you don't give a $25 tip, you're going to hell. That is not what I'm saying. I'm just saying when you do figure out what your gratuity is going to be, if you are eating in a nation where the culture is a tipping culture, before you say, well, before I say in Canada, well, they make a full wage, so I'm just going to tip $1 on $100 meal. And it don't take much to, me, Anthony, and Abigail, and LaBeth, if we went out to eat at IHOP, we'd spend $100. That's just all there is to it. So what would be the tip? Do I spend a $25 tip, a $30 tip, a $10 tip, a $5 tip? I'm going to let my conscience be my guide, and I'm going to have a baseline of cheerful giving with an understanding that if I give, it's going to be given to me. Good measure, pressed down, and shaken together, running over. So that's just something to think about. Then let's talk about fairness. Now, I don't believe the fairness principle applies to here in Canada, because here in Canada, the wait staff makes a full wage. But in the United States, those waiters and waitresses only make 1/2 of minimum wage. And many, many times they have to split their tips with the hostess, the host, the barkeep, the and some of the kitchen staff. So, Leviticus 19:13, thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until morning. Well, the idea there is if you are treating someone unfairly, like if you're in a restaurant and you order $100 worth of food and you have a very, very attentive server that you know is only making 1/2 a minimum wage, and you pester the dickens out of them, and they take it in stride and all of that good stuff, don't withhold their tip out of principle. Give them a good tip. Deuteronomy 24:14 through 15. Thou shalt not oppress a hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of thy strangers that are in thy land, within thy gates. At his day thou shalt give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. Man, now that I think about it, that's echoed in the book of James. Let's go read the book of James, chapter whatever. I can't remember. I just know what page it's on. Yeah, I'm going to start reading in chapter 5, verse 1. Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped up together ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, so look at the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. The Lord of Sabaoth, that's the Lord of hosts. That's the Lord of the arm. That's the general of the Lord's armies. Vengeance will be taken upon us if we hold back something that is rightfully earned by someone else. A laborer is worthy of his hire. You don't muzzle an ox as he treads out the grain. So if you go to a restaurant in the United States where half of minimum wage is paid to these workers, and you stiff them because of some perceived slight, be careful, because James 5 and Deuteronomy 24 may apply to you. And then, of course, caring for others, just a basic care for others. Proverbs 22:9, he that hath a bountiful eye shall be blessed, for he giveth of his bread to the poor. So let's say that you have a job where you're making a very, very good wage, and you go out to eat, and this young single mother, even if she's in that position because of terrible decisions she's made, she's still in the position. And she waits on you diligently, and she puts a smile on her face, and she's respectful to you and your family, and she tends to your needs over and above just bringing your food and making sure you got a napkin so you don't mess up the place. Give her a good tip, especially if you're blessed greatly and this world's good, because all of these principles apply. Now, even if in Canada I see that there's a member of that wait staff and they're doing the best they can to keep it together, they give good service, and they're trying their hardest in this economy, I'm going to make sure that I give a decent tip. I'm surely not going to stiff them, because if I have a bountiful eye and I giveth of my bread to the poor, then I'm going to be blessed. And then, of course, Matthew 25:35 through 40, I'm just going to read it. For I was an hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in? Or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it to the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. Folks, we've laid a foundation for understanding this biblical teachings and principles about treating others with kindness, fairness, and generosity. And these qualities all should inform what we do whenever we get our bill at a restaurant. I remember the very first video that I ever put out on the Facebooks. Don't hide your light under the bushel of entitlement. Don't hide your light under the bushel of entitlement. Whenever you go out to eat, you're entitled to a good experience and good service. If you don't get it, don't act like a poo-poo. You got me? Tip well, be gracious, and be generous. And let them know you're a Christian. That way they associate that attitude and how they're treated and that grace in the less ideal of times. They associate all that with Christianity. And you just might win somebody over. All right. In Australia, they get full pay for serving your food. Is Australia a tipping culture? I know in Europe it is not. In Europe, like England, Ireland, Scotland, those places, they're just not tipping cultures. Japan is not a tipping culture. Anyway, all right. Bear with me. Danny Mentor. My family and I stopped tipping when the farmer ran us out of the pasture. It's just not worth it. I'm not even, that's such a good joke, but I'm not going to explain it. I'm just going to let it marinate for people. I believe these songs are from Kirk Franklin and C.C. Winans, B.B. and C.C. Winans and others. Cool. I have no idea who that is, Terry. Danny Mentor also says, gratuity, in my opinion, should be based on the quality of service that you're given. Great service gets great tips. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. And that's, again, everything that I just said in these last few minutes is just information for you to take in, and then you order for yourself, according to your own conscience, how that looks in your life. Because it's just like, if I have to buy a new vehicle, the Bible tells me which vehicle to buy. In that, it doesn't say Ford Ranger. Can you even purchase a Ford Ranger anymore? So I can't go to the Bible and say, look, I want to buy a Ford Raptor, a Chevrolet Z71, or a Honda Civic. And then I won't find a book, chapter, and verse that says you need to buy the Honda Civic. What I do find is principles. For one, modesty and shamefacedness principles would apply. I know some people. That really sounded terrible. I know of a few, but I know one personally that driving a Cadillac was too flashy. But he had the platinum gold LXS Lincoln Continental that was nicer than just about any Cadillac anybody could afford, but it was a Lincoln and not a Cadillac, and so he felt like that wasn't as flashy. Now, he could afford 10 Cadillacs, but he just wanted that Lincoln. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. That Matthew 6:33, and his righteousness and all these things shall be added unto you. If we don't seek first the kingdom of God, then we don't get the blessings of the kingdom. And if I buy a vehicle where I have to pick up an extra shift or work overtime in order to afford it, then that's going to take me away from prioritizing the kingdom. Anyway, so I think I'm done. And, Danny Mentor, we appreciate the time that you give to us daily, Tony. Danny, that means a lot to me. Thank you very much. Well, folks, I hope that in our ramblings of our Free-for-All Friday, something was said that was edifying and informative. Awesome, Petrus. Thank you very much. Petrus says, as far as tipping goes, that you can if you want to. Awesome. I didn't know about that. I would love to travel to Australia one day. So much stuff I want to see. So much stuff in the world I want to see. Y'all, have you ever on Facebook Shorts or TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever seen the videos of people interacting with the king's guard and the king's horse and all that good stuff? I don't know why I watch this and I see these interactions. They're so wholesome, and it makes me weep. I want to go over there and I want to see the King's Guard and the King's Guards on horses so badly. I don't know why I'm so taken with that. And I'm American, right? I'm like red, white, and blue through and through. You know, no better and understand I'm a little bit tongue in cheek here. So if you're listening from other nations, please take this in stride. I'm being hyperbolic a little bit, but there is a sense in which I'm red, white, and blue through and through. No other nation is as good as the United States and all this, that, and the other. But man, let me tell you, I want to go over there and I want to see them. I want to see it because sometimes I watch those and I just weep because of, and I don't know why. But it makes me, I don't know the feelings that I get, but it makes me feel feelings and it makes me weep. And I gotta, after 3 or 4 of those videos, I gotta shut it off. And Danny Mentor said, yes, they are hilarious. Some of them are very, very funny because some of those horses are mean and you don't touch the King's Guard horses' reins, and you certainly don't discipline the King's Guard horses. But those horses I've seen bite people and whack them with their head, but it's the wholesome interactions where like the little kid dressed as a King's Guard. I'm going to get emotional doing this. Good grief. Don't know what's happening to me as I age. Anyway, the little kid goes up and the King's Guard are not allowed to speak. They're supposed to be very stoic. But you'll have a little kid walk up and he'll stand at attention, he'll stomp his foot, and he'll salute. And the King's Guard can't do anything. But sometimes the King's Guard will stomp his foot to let that child know that he's seen. I don't know. Anyway, I got to stop. Folks, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much. Y'all did a little bit extra on the Facebook page, on the YouTube channel rather, and we got a little bit of a boost. So thank you very much. Remember, something's happened in the algorithm where we've gone, shoo. It could be the quality of content. I don't know. But if you would help us cheat the algorithm, quite frankly, and share the content, interact with the content, we'd appreciate it so much. The reels where the horse gets people that get too close is funny. They're an animal. Treat them as such or pay the price. Absolutely. Australia has 4 time zones. Australia is a big old place. The United States only has 3. Is that right? There's Pacific, Central, and Eastern. Is that right? Oh, well. Yeah, Australia's big. Anyway, guys, God bless every one of you. This has been Tony Brewer with Cogitations. You can like, subscribe, and share where you're listening to here, or you can go to Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or TuneIn Radio, and you can subscribe and you can hear the archives of these